In this episode, I'm going to show you how a 3D modeling commission for young Genji swords turned into a full-blown Dragon Con build that I did in 27 days. Okay, so a little story time. In late July, I was commissioned by my good friend Black Diamond Arsenal to make young Genji's his deflection sword and the long katana. So I did that, but kind of... Oh, what's that, cat? What's that? Someone wants to say hi. Yes. Say hi, cat. Hi, cat. Mew, mew. Mew, mew. Anyways, Black Diamond Arsenal commissioned me to make the 3D models for him to print out a set of swords for his client. Anyways, I did that, delivered it, but then I got to thinking like, okay, so I did Genji last year. I'm kind of like, why don't I take another stab at a different version of Genji, which I thought would be easy. Little did I know, it'd be quite an adventure. So, I just wanted to kind of cover how I produced these amazing swords, which you can see, making all those glamour sounds. One thing you will find interesting, as smooth and solid as it looks, it's 3D printed using not PLA, not ABS, not even PETG, but TPU from SaintSmart. So it's all bendy, 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 bendy. And it's not going to cause any cracking to the print itself. I'll kind of get into it deeper, but long story short, I used epoxy, of all things, from Michaels. Your $15, I believe it's a Lumalite brand epoxy that you can get. Not Smooth on XTC, which is pretty pricey, or Epsilon, which is great, flexible, but also very pricey. I went with cheap and affordable. So let's get into how I actually made it. Like most of my builds, the journey starts with 3D modeling using Fusion 360, which is my go-to software when it comes to doing anything that looks like it's been manufactured. The sketching and 3D modeling took me roughly 3 to 3.5 hours to do both the katana and the deflection swords and all the associated scabbards and accessories, which is about average for me since blades are generally quite easy for me to model up. They're nice linear straight shapes, simple curves, nothing particularly ornate or crazy, so it was a pretty quick, solid execution from start to finish. Okay, I just want to take a minute to pause here for just a second. I know some folks really want to know how to model these sorts of things. Don't worry, I'm going to do a full-length kind of tutorial using the same, basically all the screen grabs, all the screen recordings I have from the Genji sword build to kind of teach people how to make blades and swords in Fusion 360 and have scabbards that actually kind of you can fit stuff in, because sometimes it took me a little while to learn and figure out the tricks and the ways to make scabbards that don't suck and actually can take blades. So anyways, back to your regularly scheduled tutorial. But of course, since I was praying fast, I had to use thick layer heights, which meant the lines were very visible. Since TPU is rubbery and soft, sanding really won't do much good. Like, you'll sand through PLA a lot faster. So what I ended up having to do is I had to build up the surface. First using drywall spackle, watering it down by 50% and just kind of brushing it on. and then sanding it off, and then doing a final coat of epoxy. As an additional measure, I opted to block sand the epoxy smooth, going all the way up to about 1500 grit, giving the sword very sharp edges and a nice sheen. As a final step, to identify any final flaws or imperfections, I coated the whole thing in a very, very light coat of Rust-Oleum filler primer. And I have to emphasize thin coats, because too much filler primer can crack when flexed. To paint the model, I opted to use a mix of Rub and Buff Silver Leaf for the blade and acrylics, which are flexible, to paint the rest of it. After a bit of experimentation, I actually found that Rub and Buff went best on lightly sanded gray primer. So sadly, all my footage of rubbing and buffing all the swords was lost. So pretend this stock footage of me rubbing and buffing this shoulder piece is the swords. From there, it was relatively straightforward to paint the rest of the model. First, doing the grips in black for the deflection blade and white for the katana blade. For the rest of the metallics, I opted to be a bit baller and use Games Workshop Citadel plates, Retributor armor for the golds, and Lead Belcher for the silvers. Boy, it's expensive, but the pigment counts are high and it goes on super cleanly. So definitely well worth the money in my opinion. Once all the base painting was done on the swords and the scabbards, I realized that I needed to still do the elaborate Shimada sigil and the very elaborate dragons. Knowing I couldn't freehand either one, I opted to return to Fusion and design some stencils and print them. Once I had the stencils printed, it was a simple matter of placing them where I wanted them, masking off the rest of the areas, and then painting. Though the dragon stencil was a little bit trickier because I realized it was such thin lines I couldn't, the details wouldn't translate onto the print. So I ended up creating a reverse stencil where I would put down a base coat of gold, let it dry, and then put the stencil on top of it and then airbrush the rest of the excess areas black. Surprisingly, the effect ended up working out really nicely. Among the final touches was to add cloth detailing, such as the grips and the elaborate display knots. For the grips, I used bias tape cut in half and double side tape to tack it down. And it was a simple matter of twist, turn once, turn twice, twist it around the grip, turn once, turn twice, and just rinse and repeat all the way down. Finally, doing the display knot took me a few attempts, but I managed to eventually figure it out. There were actually surprisingly quite a few good tutorials that gave me the right idea of what I needed to do. voila! That is how you get a Genji Katana and Deflection Sword set. Hey there! Thank you so much for watching. I hope this tutorial was informative and gave you some ideas on how you can make your own set of Genji swords. The STL files are actually available on my Patreon. That is at patreon.com/HIRO creations. Again, it means a lot to me that you're watching. If you haven't subscribed, I highly recommend hitting that subscribe button down here. And I'd be remiss in not asking you to hit that like and share button. It helps really boost the signal and get that word out. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.